What if the Roman Empire never fell? Picture a line of torches burning along the Danube, night after night, century after century. The eagle standard is not a relic in a museum. It still flies over marble highways that never cracked, aqueducts that never dried, and a single law that never surrendered to chaos. Imagine maps without the patchwork of dukes and kings. Imagine one coin, one passport, one postal seal, Roma. Not a memory, but the air of the present. If that thought sends a shiver, stay with it. Because to imagine a Rome that doesn't fall is to rewrite the rules of faith, science, and the world itself. First, a quick walk through what really happened. The western half of Rome didn't collapse in one dramatic night. It sagged under the weight of crisis. Political infighting turned succession into a dice roll. The tax base crumbled. The army relied more and more on border tribes, foederati, who had their own agendas. Pressures from the Goths and Huns turned borderlands into earthquakes. Rome was sacked in 410 by Alaric's Visigoths, then again in 455 by the Vandals. The final formality came in 476, when a boy emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer. The eastern half, the empire we call Byzantine, endured in Constantinople. It shone, shrank, revived, and carried the Roman flame for 1,000 more years. But the West? That world fragmented into feudalism, Latin Christendom, and a chorus of new languages and crowns. To be clear, collapse wasn't absolute darkness. Trade flickered on. Monasteries kept learning alive. Charlemagne tried to stitch the idea of empire back together. But roads cracked, the old tax system splintered, and the imperial habit of urban life thinned. Power became local. The Pope, once one voice among many bishops, took on a crown-like aura, and across the Mediterranean, new powers rose, new faiths gathered force. The stage reset. So, what keeps Rome standing in our alternate timeline? Let's pick a hinge. Imagine the 4th century sharpening the reforms that already started under emperors like Aurelian and Diocletian. Diocletian's idea of shared rule, 4 emperors with clear zones, doesn't fracture. It matures. Constantine keeps it, but adds a law of succession that actually sticks. No more civil wars every 3rd harvest. The army is reorganized into mobile field forces backed by fortified river lines. Foederati remain, yes, but as disciplined internal colonies with strict Roman law, land grants tied to service, and multi-year hostages exchanged to guarantee loyalty. The gold solidus stays stable. Tax farmers are curbed. Provincial elites gain honors for maintaining roads, bridges, and aqueducts, not just for throwing parties at the circus. Now watch the 5th century roll by in this world. The Goths press the Danube and are settled as Roman provincials, not mercenary kingmakers. They get Roman judges, Roman schools, Latin names tacked onto Gothic lineages. When a Hun lord rattles the frontier, the empire pays in steel and in marriage alliances, not in panic. The capital is a twin star. Rome still matters as a civic shrine and administrative heart of the West, while Constantinople is the armored bank vault of the East. Together they run a system that no longer tears itself apart every time a talented general is born. And Britain? No dimming into the fog. The Roman fleet patrols the Channel. The Saxons remain traders and federates rather than a tidal wave. Londinium is not abandoned. It evolves. The island grows up Roman and Celtic at the same time, a northern mosaic of Latin law and local myth. The language of the Britons bends toward a Romance tongue, peppered with Celtic rhythm. If a poet stands on Hadrian's wall at dawn, he writes in a Latin that tastes of rain. Power looks different without Western collapse. The Church remains the empire's nervous system, but not its rival. The papacy carries moral authority, not a crown. Imperial councils hash out doctrine, East and West together, under a civil service that knows both Latin and Greek. Justinian's dream of a unified law code. It happens earlier, cleaner, and across the entire empire. The Codex Romanus becomes a living document, updated every decade. Plague still comes, history's dice still roll, but aqueducts, grain fleets, and public health edicts blunt the blow. The state orders mass burials with dignity, temporary tax relief, and emergency grain. Cities bend, but they don't break. Now we step into the 6th and 7th centuries. Without the scramble to reconquer the West, imperial energy flows into infrastructure and knowledge. Athens, Alexandria, Carthage, Ravenna. Each becomes a crown jewel in a network of imperial academies. The empire spreads a standardized courier system, wax-sealed dispatches moving from legion post to legion post on time, like a metronome. Paper arrives earlier, via the same trade arteries that carry silk and spices. Bureaucrats, poets, and engineers use it. Libraries copy faster. Schools multiply. Meanwhile, over the Arabian sands, the prophet's message rises. Islam emerges, as it did in our world, with fervor, community, and a powerful simplicity. But the Roman East it meets is less exhausted. Egypt and Syria are not neglected provinces. They are wealthy pillars with garrisons well paid, governors locally respected, and farmers tied to land by fairer tax codes. Early Arab armies strike and they win border towns, but not capitals. Negotiated frontiers settle near the deserts rather than the Nile. Trade continues. Ideas cross anyway, because they always do. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad still blooms in time, but its partnerships with imperial scholars are more open, less defined by conquest and more by letters, treaties, and mutual curiosity. The Mediterranean remains a Roman lake dotted with Muslim ports, not a hard line split by 1,000 raids. What about Northern Europe, the birthplace of so much later turbulence and creativity? In this world, Germanic tribes are not over-the-horizon kingdoms. They are woven in, Franks, Lombards, and Goths wearing togas over their tunics, arguing property law in Latin with German accents. There's no Holy Roman Empire echoing the idea of Rome because the original keeps breathing. The word king shrinks. The word governor grows. Feudalism never spreads like ivy. Castles exist, but they're imperial fortresses plugged into logistics routes, not the lonely hubs of tiny warlords. And the Vikings, the story shifts. With the Channel guarded and the North Sea patrolled, raiding becomes less profitable than treaties. Scandinavia turns merchant sooner. Sea kings still sail, but for cargo, not fire. Norse sagas sing about embassies in Ravenna and grand markets in Lutetia, Paris, where fur meets glassware and amber meets olive oil, all under the watch of imperial taxmen with calculated smiles. Technology speeds up in weird, quiet ways. The empire throws money at mills and canals because bread and taxes depend on them. Heavy plows spread across colder provinces fast. Horse collars shift from curiosity to standard issue. Watermills and windmills multiply like geese along every river bend. Glassmakers get state contracts for lenses. Monks and mathematicians tinker with optics a century early. Hospitals are civic, not just religious, backed by provincial budgets. Somewhere near Antioch, an engineer experiments with sluice gates that will one day look like precursors to hydro projects. And from the east, this matters, black powder filters west over scholarly trade networks. The empire adopts it cautiously, then decisively. By the 10th century, border fortresses boast small bombards. The legions drill with hand cannons. When the next wave of steppe horsemen tries a lightning raid, they meet thunder from walls. Does a giant empire mean less innovation because there's no rival across the river? Maybe. That's the classic argument. Fragmented Europe in our timeline, France, England, the Italian states, competed so hard they forced each other to get smarter. In a single empire, would everything turn slow and polite? Not necessarily. Imagine imperial federalism that plays cities against each other in a race for honor. Alexandria wants to outshine Ravenna in astronomy and maps. Carthage wants to win the imperial prize for canal engineering. Antioch wants the imperial survey to stamp its name on the new calendar. Rome, the city, is no longer just the center. It's the judge's chair. Standards make markets bigger. Postal seals make ideas travel faster. Bureaucracy can be dead weight, but it can also be an engine when it picks the right projects and won't let go. Now tilt the camera to the Atlantic. With the Silk Road safe enough and the Red Sea under firm management, The empire doesn't need a sea route to Asia as desperately as the Portugal and Spain of our world did. Yet curiosity, commerce, and prestige are still powerful fuel. Picture the 14th century, a long, slender caravel leaving the docks of Olisipo, Lisbon, under an imperial admiralty banner. Not a private venture, but a state expedition. Islands in the ocean become waypoints. The Azores fly the eagle. Mariner's map whines in clean Latin script. Knowledge is not hoarded by guilds. The Admiralty publishes a pilot's guide for imperial use. By the 15th century, western shores appear. Caribbean harbors, a coastline that feels like a new myth. Contact is still a shock. Disease still burns paths no one can see. There is tragedy the empire cannot prevent and only slowly understands. But colonization looks different. There are no conquistadors chasing private dreams with a royal wink. There are procurators, legal status for indigenous polities, and census takers. The empire is not gentle. Empires rarely are, but it is methodical. It issues edicts forbidding unauthorized enslaving of new subjects. It wants taxes more than silver fever. Mesoamerican engineering staggers Roman engineers. Roads in the Andes are not torn down. They are measured, cataloged, and then linked to imperial depots. The Latin of the West crosses an ocean and meets Nahuatl and Quechua. It absorbs words. It leaves others intact. A new Latin blooms, provincial, American, electric, with borrowed sounds. Global balance shifts. There is no Franco-Spanish rivalry to spill into centuries of European war. No English empire scything across the seas. Instead, a pan-Roman navy writes rules for shipping lanes and piracy courts. The Caliphate, centered in Arabia and Mesopotamia, remains a powerhouse of thought, trade, and faith, negotiating on equal terms, sometimes sparring, sometimes partnering. India is not a chessboard for a handful of European companies. It's a vast marketplace where Roman, Arab, and Indian merchants negotiate miles of textiles and spice contracts, sometimes under the shade of imperial consulates. East Asia watches this with interest. China's dynasties send and receive embassies regularly. Gunpowder tech passes in both directions, refined by different hands, adopted by different doctrines. Culture and architecture carry a long, unbroken line. There is no sudden vertical leap into Gothic spires powered by local lords vying for God's attention. Instead, domes and arches evolve into grander, lighter forms. Imagine a skyline of basilicas and baths refined into public halls, with mosaics shimmering like starlight under lanterns. In Ravenna, a public theater stages comedies that Cicero would recognize, but laughs at jokes about water taxes. In York, a basilica's choir sings a Latin that sounds like ocean wind. Festivals carry the weight of centuries. The empire celebrates law, like others celebrate coronations. If that sounds austere, don't be fooled. People always find ways to dance. Daily life is not a marble postcard. It's sweaty and human, but the frame around it is consistent. A child in Gaul learns her letters on a wax tablet stamped with the imperial crest. Her father carries a little wooden tally he shows at road gates to pass without paying the toll twice. A doctor in Antioch prescribes a recipe copied from a state-sanctioned manual, then adds a local herb because his grandmother swore by it. There's a census every 5 years. There's a legal process for almost everything. A passport stamped in Carthage works in Cologne. Stability hums in small things. Would this bring freedom or suffocation? That question never goes away. A system that's strong can protect people and also watch them too closely. It can smooth the spikes of local cruelty and also sand down the edges of local creativity. Perhaps the empire learns to loosen its grip over centuries. Provincial assemblies speak louder. The emperor becomes less a commander, more a constitutional referee. Or perhaps it clings too tightly and faces civil movements from within, not from barbarian gates. By the early modern era, the empire's arsenals double as research labs. Steam is tested to lift water from mines in Hispania and to drive the hammers in Pannonia. Need meets curiosity, and the spark is industry. Printing, adopted earlier thanks to paper, has already saturated the literate classes. A monk in Ravenna writes a treatise that sounds suspiciously like the scientific method, blending Aristotelian habits with imperial audit culture. The Reformation as we knew it doesn't ignite, because the church lacks the feudal fuel that let princes use faith as a flag. Instead, theological reforms roll through imperial synods like tides, slower, less fiery, but not absent. Wars of religion never rip the heart out of Central Europe. Debates do. The map looks calmer on paper. In people's minds, it's just as stormy. Midway through this thought experiment, let's test your imagination. In a world where Rome holds, which change reshapes history the most? The survival of a united Christian East and West, or the delay and redesign of the Age of Discovery under one imperial banner? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this journey is lighting up your inner mapmaker, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next what if. Fast forward again. The empire's legal tradition, honed for a millennium, becomes the operating system of global trade. Contracts cross oceans like migrating birds. Colonies, better to call them provinces, don't look identical. Some are run directly, others are federations under imperial protection with their own councils. The word citizenship stretches. Slavery erodes earlier under law and tax logic. Free people pay more taxes. Replace chains with ledgers and the state nods. And languages? Latin doesn't freeze. It keeps evolving, splitting into dialects that stay mutually intelligible through schools, theater, and the army. A baker from Lusitania understands a merchant from Belgica with a smile and a squint. Greek remains the other pillar. Scholars write in a blended classical style. Insults fly in both tongues. Arabic and Aramaic flourish along the frontiers, tied into the empire's trade. They don't vanish. Europe looks less like a Tower of Babel and more like a cathedral with many chapels under one vault. Think of the dominoes that never fall. No 100 Years' War. No carved-up Italy dominated by foreign crowns. No 30 Years' War choking Central Europe with smoke. Different tragedies take their places. Famines that hit provinces together. Earthquakes that test the empire's promises. Politics still royal. Factions still plot. But the rhythm of collapse and reassembly that shaped our Europe is replaced by a slow, deep baseline of continuity. And on the streets of a modern imperial city, call it Nova Roma, built around the old, electric trams slide under arches. Civil servants with tablet screens walk beneath statues left from the Republic, checking flood plans on a river that carried legionaries 2,000 years ago. Museums sit next to ministries. A child licks gelato under a legal code that started as chiseled bronze and now lives in code repositories. An old woman lights a candle in a basilica that survived 10 plagues and 3 architectural fashions. Outside, a street poet rhymes in Latin you would recognize after a few minutes, about taxes you would recognize instantly. Could a single empire have given the world that peace? Could it have strangled the sparks of wild invention that came from rivalry? The honest answer is both, in different places, at different times. History is not one road, it is a braided river. In this braid, the Roman current stays strong, sometimes muddy, sometimes clear, carrying along cultures that would have been islands in our world, giving them shared names and old laws. All of this, maps that never shattered, faiths that negotiated rather than crucified each other on politics, science that moved by decree instead of desperation, rests on fragile choices, a succession law properly enforced, a border settled instead of burned, a general who kept a promise. That's the haunting part. Civilization can hinge on paperwork as much as it does on battlefield glory. So, what if the Roman Empire never fell? Maybe our cities would feel ancient and new at the same time. Maybe our languages would carry more Rome in their bones. Maybe we would have traded a century of war-fueled innovation for a millennium of logistics-fueled progress. The past we inherited is one draft. Somewhere in the attic of possibilities sits another. A world with the eagle still in the sky, and the road ahead paved not by ruins, but by decisions that held. If that sounds impossible, remember how close Rome came to holding. Then listen to the silence after the legions march by and ask, how many little choices does it take to keep the torches burning? History is fragile. That's why it's fascinating. And that's why every time we ask what if, we learn a little more about the world we got and the worlds we didn't.